right, coming up, yes, more on the crisis in Japan. Our Taking Stock think tank is going to look at all aspects of the disaster. We're also going to look at some of the long-term effects, the cultural effects in Japan, next. This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. All right, Japan continues to struggle to cap the radiation leaks from its damaged nuclear power plants. Tonight, we examine the possible global effects of the earthquake, the tsunami, and the ensuing nuclear crisis in Japan. My guests are Anthony DeFilippo. He is the professor of sociology at Lincoln University. He is also the author of Japan's Nuclear Disarmament Policy and the U.S. Security Umbrella. Also with us, Sebastian Mallaby, Director of Geoeconomic Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. And we have John Mitola. He is the president of Juhl Wind, an alternative energy company. John was formerly an executive at the subsidiary of Exelon Corporation. We know that Exelon has 17 nuclear reactors operating here in the United States. Gentlemen, good to have you with us. Sebastian, I want to begin by posing to you the issue of Japan's position in a nuclear world. Here you have the one country that was attacked with nuclear weapons, so they have that legacy to deal with. Plus, if you go back to, let's say, the 1950s, you have fallout, radioactive fallout from U.S. nuclear tests in the Pacific affecting Japan, and yet Japan's stated policy is they are not going to be a nuclear power, and yet we now see how they rely on nuclear power for so much of their electrical generation. Does this put Japan in one of these odd situations that it's almost between a rock and a hard place when it looks to the future of dealing with nuclear energy?
It is a painful irony. You know, I was a correspondent in Tokyo in 1995 on the 50th anniversary of those two nuclear bombs. And so I went to those ceremonies, and the pain and the emotion around that was extreme. I mean, one thing I do remember about what was being said at the time is that the survivors of those attacks who had been exposed to radiation actually had a longer life expectancy afterwards. The reason being is that they got so much medical attention, paradoxically they did better. And so I think, you know, maybe the bright side here is that Japan has a history of experiencing this kind of tragedy and maybe has more resilience and experience in knowing how to bounce back.
Anthony DeFilippo, can you come in on this topic and talk about it in relationship to the United States? Because from a strategic perspective, as you've described in your book, Japan benefits from the U.S. nuclear umbrella, yet at the same time, Japan pulls back and is committed to not having nuclear weapons. Where does this leave the leadership of Japan when it tries to plot a future course for its nuclear power industry?
Well, one of the issues in Japan that's quite important is there's a good bit of public opposition, if not opposition, at least significant skepticism about the use of nuclear energy. So the Japanese government has had a reasonably difficult time trying to convince the public that these nuclear facilities, these energy producing facilities are safe, ecologically safe. So essentially, the bottom line is that what's very likely to happen in the coming months is in Japan, given the large amount of public opposition and skepticism relating to nuclear energy itself. I mean, they protest when U.S. warships enter their ports, nuclear warships enter their ports. Essentially, you're likely to see these anti-nuclear groups in Japan rev themselves up and put their foot down and essentially put the government on the spot. How essentially the government's going to make increasing energy dependence on nuclear power safe for the Japanese people. And it's going to be a tough sell for the Japanese government.
John Mitola, come in on this topic of energy and how there are now many alternatives to what might be described as conventional power generation, whether it be nuclear or coal. Juhl Wind, obviously, in that field. Are you seeing more expressions of interest just because of what's happened in Japan in the last few days?
There really has been, especially on the investor side. Both the institutional investors interested in investing in the wind energy assets themselves, as well as new projects that are coming on the drawing boards that have kind of been stalled here in the U.S., really given the problems in the capital markets generally. But we know that, the energy pie needs all of these ingredients. I just think that the problems in Japan have given us all pause to be a little bit more thoughtful about the nuclear part of this mix. we were kind of racing to start adding a number of additions to the nuclear fleet in the U.S. And those of us in the renewable business would say, hey, renewables have matured now to a point where they're extremely reliable. They're very cost competitive. This is
Can you do it without government subsidies?
We are beginning to. And it's important to note that all forms of energy are subsidized.
Sure, there's a historical precedence for each industry group.
Absolutely. I mean, nuclear power enjoys one of the biggest subsidies. It's insured by the federal government. And the federal government is responsible for taking care of the nuclear waste, which has not been taken care of.
Right. We've yet to even deal with that issue in any kind of consistent way. All right, we're going to continue the conversation more ahead with our Taking Stock think tank on Japan coming up. And also, we're going to talk about your iPad. The iPad, maybe it makes you less of a person. We're going to talk about the consequences of ubiquitous technology. Can it be hurting your relationships with your friends, your family? And what about your relationship with your gadgets? That's all coming up on Taking Stock right here on Bloomberg.
People feel empowered.
The most influential voices in economics, finance, and investment. Talk to Tom Keene on Bloomberg Radio.
They know the level of discussion is worth their time.
Subscribe to our premium podcast service and get all of Tom's interviews commercial-free. Hear them how you want, when you want.
Plus, you'll receive weekly research reviews not available anywhere else. Go to Bloomberg.com/Tom Keene for details.
The power and ease that makes OptionsXpress one of Barron's top-rated online brokers is now available from your desktop. Introducing Extend trading software. Now get 3 months trading free. Extend, built by OptionsXpress, customized by you.
The odds of the Big Easy winning the US Open twice? 1 in 1.2 billion. The odds of him having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. Ernie Els encourages you to learn the signs of autism.
We believe the world's becoming a much smaller place. MFS has a very unique global research platform where we break the world down into 8 sectors. And on those sector teams are global research analysts and fixed income analysts. The sector teams meet every week by video conference and discuss ideas so that we can share it across the platform. And that cooperation and teamwork is what separates us.
Hey, all you Pakrats, how would you like to declutter your home without all the hassles of moving and storage? Well, now you can with 1-800-PAKRAT.
With Pakrat, the storage facility comes to you. That's right. Just give Pakrat a call and we'll have one of our bright and shiny steel containers lowered right in the old driveway. And once you're done loading, we'll come and take it to one of our cozy climate-controlled warehouses. Or if you're moving, we'll deliver it across the street, across town, even across the country. And for a limited time, we'll take $100 off your first month's storage charges.
Are you anxious to protect your family with life insurance, but afraid you can't afford it? Well, look how much insurance many people can get through Selectquote for less than $1 a day. Selectquote found Rich, 37, a $500,000 policy for under $18 a month. Even though Dave, 43, takes meds to control his blood pressure, Selectquote got him a $500,000 policy for under $28 a month. Ellen, 47, got a $250,000 policy for under $20 a month. All it takes is a phone call. Your personal Selectquote agent will answer all your questions and impartially shop the highly rated term life companies Selectquote represents for your best rates. Give your family the security it needs at a price you can afford. Call this number or go to SelectQuote.com. Selectquote. We shop, you save.
This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. We're talking about the global effects of the crisis in Japan. My guests are Anthony DeFilippo. He is a professor of sociology at Lincoln University. He is also the author of Japan's Nuclear Disarmament Policy and the U.S. Security Umbrella. Also with us, Sebastian Mallaby. He is the director of geoeconomic studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. And we also have John Mitola. He is the president of Juhl Wind, an alternative energy company. Anthony DeFilippo, can you give us a little bit of sort of an insight into the relationship between Japan, its nuclear policy, and the United States? Is it likely, as you just described, that you're going to have more activist protests against nuclear energy in Japan? What's that going to do for the U.S. strategic interests in the region?
Well, I think that, as I said before, that it's probably a very safe bet that you're going to see a strong opposition in Japan to the use of nuclear energy. In terms of the United States, I think that they would like to see Japan push ahead because with nuclear power, because like the United States, the Japanese government is basically attempting to convince the public that it's essentially a safe way to produce energy. But the long and short of it is that essentially in Japan there's a deep, or let's say enduring memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were killed by nuclear blast. So it's really sort of a touchy situation because although Tokyo and Washington are best of friends, essentially what you have is a Japanese government that's got to convince a very skeptical, and I'm sure going to be increasingly skeptical Japanese public of the threats and dangers of nuclear energy. The United States has got to essentially, to some extent, sit on the sideline with this one because essentially, it's really an internal type of issue that the government has to deal with, a really skeptical population. So I think in the long run, the United States is really going to try to work with Tokyo as best as it can, but it's got to keep its distance because it is effectively an internal type of matter.
Sebastian, I want to pick up on something that Anthony was talking about, the United States being on the sidelines. The United States being on the sidelines when it came to Egypt, the United States when it comes to Libya right now. Are we at a point in history where in the future the United States is going to have to be in almost like a post-American era where it sits on the sidelines much more than we're used to?
I think one of the most stunning contrasts of the last few days has been the fact that the West has been debating a no-fly zone on Libya when the Arab League wants it.
They already passed a resolution in support of it.
Exactly, and now they're working at the UN to get it, and the US is kind of hanging back, not doing it. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is deploying troops in Bahrain. They're not hesitating. The US says to Saudi Arabia, don't go into Bahrain, don't bring your tanks in. The Saudis just say, forget it, they go in anyway. So the US is totally on the sidelines right now in the Middle East, and it's almost by choice because there's been a determination in the administration that they want this to be a made-at-home, homemade uprising, and so they're not going to kind of put their fingerprints on it. And the consequence is that they're going to hang back, and the Saudis are not going to hang back, and the Gaddafis of the world will bring in foreign mercenaries to put down the uprising, and the US will just watch.
I want to bring in John and bring in China if I can, because I wonder if the Chinese are going to use this to their advantage, deploy more alternative energy, continue with their nuclear program. Do you see any change in the way China's energy policy is being managed?
I suspect there will be little change, and they'll just continue a very aggressive growth. I mean, they're not only leading the world in the growth of coal-fired plants, they've also been leading in wind and solar as well. And that's just happened in a matter of a couple of years. And of course, their demand for oil is increasing by the day.
So they're not sitting on the sidelines at all.
Not one bit. And, I think it really calls into question, is the U.S. ever going to have an energy policy, a sustainable energy policy? Something we've been talking about for a long, long time, but it just really has not occurred. The markets have grown and they're ready to go. We need a little bit of a government policy that brings some general strategy to what we're doing.
Well, gentlemen, I look forward to having you in the future. Maybe we'll be debating that energy policy. I want to thank you very much. John Mitola, Anthony DeFilippo, Sebastian Mallaby. Coming up, more on Japan, and we're going to take a look at the country's complicated relationship with atomic energy.